Being a thrill seeker, when you said that, it triggered something in me that I think at the beginning of understanding of any topic, that there has to be some level of thrill seekerness. I watched a movie about a guy building the first deep water dive suit with the hose, and that guy had to have been some level of thrill seeker / scientist. Or Jacques Cousteau building his big crazy super boat. There had to have been a thrill seeker aspect there of somebody willing to go out there and chase down God knows what. So I think you're allowed to be both. But how'd you get connected with these people? Were you chasing leads down, or did they come to you? Was it divine, how they just kind of showed up to you when you needed them most? Or?
No, it's a small community really of Bigfooters, and once you kind of get involved with going to a conference or a camp out, word gets around. And in this case, Daryl Adams, who is a recent retired contractor, had moved up from California to Oregon and attended something called Beachfoot, had a conversation with Ron Moorhead and said, "Hey, I know Tobe. He, lives right outside of where you're moving. Maybe you can go talk to him and he can take you out in the field sometime." And I'd kind of, taken my foot off the gas for a while and hadn't really looked into the phenomena for about 2 years or so. But when Daryl got a hold of me, it just was the perfect time. And so I ended up going in the woods with him and finding these knee impressions, which really, then without finding those knee impressions, I don't know where the story would have been. Maybe everything still would have happened in the order it did. Maybe it was destined to be talked about. It seemed, and that's the way some of these stories go, is that they seem like they are waiting for certain people to arrive at a certain time. It's almost like the tumblers in a lock, and everything has to line up. And especially if you're in a liminal state, that seems to be key. If you're in the middle of a big transition, and what are we in right now globally? So who knows what's about to happen? I mean, we have all the UFO stuff unfolding, which I don't think is by accident. Here we are in the middle of this huge transition with something called the Great Reset, this new order being established. And now all of a sudden we have, agreement that we might have off-world vehicles. And, it's a very strange time. So the same thing was happening to me on a smaller level, a big life transition. And at that point, there was so much that happened immediately that I'd already been accustomed to. For example, the couple asked me to move into the house. And so I brought my 16 or 17 foot long camper and all my worldly possessions and parked them right outside their house. And we basically wanted to see if these knocks and hits that were coming around the property could be recorded. And so the long-term study of figuring out whether or not these were only Sasquatch sounds began. And so 1,400 hours worth of audio was recorded for about a year. And I'm being kind with that number. I think it was actually more. So I'm working full-time, recording audio and video full-time, and then coming back and trying to play, Bigfoot.
Right.
Only
trying to re-listen.
It refused to just be Bigfoot, because then these EVPs started showing up. And the EVPs were so complex that we knew it wasn't Sasquatch because we were hearing human language. We were hearing English. There was the circumstances of how this property came to be, which was kind of odd, which also is a timing issue. The people that owned the property before had suddenly sold the house. A whole family had lived there and moved only 45 minutes down the road and sold it for about $35,000 less than asking price at the top of the real estate market. And shortly afterwards, the eldest son commits suicide.
Okay.
So we kind of find all these things out as we're looking for Bigfoot. Like, why did these people move out? Why would this kid kill himself? Well, we found out that his old bedroom, was probably the most haunted part of the house. And we didn't plan on having a haunting at the same time, but this is where the EVP started, was in this kid's bedroom, where eventually he would commit suicide. And he ended, the EVP we got said, "I'm dead." And it was, it sounded like a child's voice, probably 14 years old. And And so it was a controlled area as much as we could. And, at first you're trying to rule out whether or not this is some kind of sound contamination. If anything is a contamination, whether or not it be just for lark of someone playing a game with you, or whether or not you're hearing what you want to hear, because I totally had Bigfootitis. Like, I'm a Bigfoot researcher, right? I'm out here doing this, so I'm going to have confirmation bias. So that's when I started inviting other people out, just like, hey, I need confirmation here. Let's all leave out recorders, and you go home and listen to what you got. And that's when the gifts started showing up. And by gifts, I mean objects of significance meant for you. And they were left in a real specific place so you would find them and nobody else. One of the most common striking examples is after we were looking for a taxidermied rabbit. And we were building the Sasquatch replica, and I thought, well, what better example than to put a rabbit maybe at the base of Bigfoot's feet to symbolize the rabbit hole. And so we're looking on
scale.
Looking for a taxidermied rabbit. Well, I get home from work and there's a dead rabbit with a rock lodged in its head sitting in front of my trailer. Now, it's so fresh in the middle of summer, it has no bugs on it and no predation marks.
Yeah.
Just a rock. And it's laying right in front of my camper. My girlfriend gets a hold of me and says, wow, thank God they didn't leave you a snake. You hate snakes. And 3 days later, there's a snake with its head ripped off sitting right where the rabbit was left.
Yeah, we need a statue of the neighbor's kid to put under the Bigfoot, and then you would have found something absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it got real, real quick. So it's very hard to turn away from death. Here we are asking for something dead, having barbecues. They know that we're meat eaters, but, I'm looking for a rabbit, a taxidermy rabbit. They give me something even better. They give me a fresh cottontail rabbit with hardly any damage to it. The snakes seem to be a joke. So those are just two really brief examples. And so as people are reading along in this book, they get to the chapter on the snake. They take their smartphone, they scan the QR code. It takes you to the moment I hop out of my Jeep Commander with my iPhone and see this rabbit sitting there. Call Daryl out and say, you got to see this, man. Stop whatever you're doing. And so to have those moments, to be transported automatically as you're reading along. If it wasn't seamless, we wouldn't have done it, but it is seamless. As long as you have a good internet connection, you just scan along and away you go.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Is there, because you're in there and you're trying to be detached, logical, try to figure out what's going on there. I never thought of this as being a problem, but is there a point where you're just all like, well, did the ghost or did the Bigfoot leave me the snake?
Yeah.
And what exactly am I even able to untie this knot of two different things that I still don't know what they are, and yet I'm supposed to untie the knot?
Well, yes and yes. There's no way to know for certain because this stuff loves to keep the secrets coming. The clues and the questions are pretty much all you really have for the most part. But this story, there was so much physical evidence. It started with these knee impressions, which at first I thought, well, I do a podcast about the paranormal. I'll just film the process of me casting these probable bear knees that are squatted down. So that's how we took it. Just like we'll show people the process of casting. But when they came back as 1,400 pounds in anomalous hair, and then an orthopedic surgeon looks at them and says, those are giant human knees, but they're not human. So that's where we kind of thought it might end. I was ready for it all to end with the knees, but then we had these giant handprints show up on 3 different occasions around the house. And they're large, greasy handprints, 3 times the size of any man I've ever seen. And they were just, embedded or infused onto the pickup truck, onto the garage, onto my trailer, with hair attached into the greasy impression of where the fingers were. And so to see that, I'd never cast hand impressions before, let alone, tried to extract any kind of cellular DNA or anything off of it. But we kind of went to the school of hard knocks and would laugh about like who's going to go down to the Dollar Tree to make their own, $5 forensic kit and come back and try to cast these hand impressions.
Right.
So we did. And so was that Sasquatch that did that? Probably, because previous to this, over those 15 years we're skipping, was example after example of extended experiencers being gifted objects of significance, as though Sasquatch was listening, paying attention, hearing the needs of others, and then leaving objects of significance